You're tuned into the Spot-Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot-Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. In today's episode, breaking down the Spurs' Sunday afternoon win over the Brooklyn Nets. Looking back at the Spurs' wins over the Mavericks and Pelicans to remain undefeated in the opening week of the season. And finally, reviewing the injury report for the team. Welcome back to another episode of the Spot-Up Pod. It's been about a week since I last recorded an episode. I do want to note that I'm recording this on Sunday afternoon after the Spurs win over the Brooklyn Nets. So the way I'm going to frame this episode is I'm going to first do what I've usually done in a written format, which is break down that Nets game with the Spurs and Nets on Sunday afternoon. Then from there, I'll kind of give a recap of the week, how everything went with the Spurs in their opening week, and then also move on to the third topic, which is discussing the injuries for the team. And I do want to note that I haven't had a chance to do a film breakdown of this game. These are going to be basically like the stats plus my opening observations from this game against the Brooklyn Nets. So let's go ahead and go to Sunday. The Spurs are opening up their home season against the Brooklyn Nets. They were favored by 10.5 points. San Antonio was. So basically, Vegas expected this to be a pretty big, win for the Spurs, but it didn't quite turn out like that early on. So, I mean, in the middle of the game. So let's just talk about the game. So early on, the Spurs looked okay. They were leading by 7 points after the end of the first quarter. Toward the end of the second quarter, San Antonio really took charge. They went on a late run and went into halftime with a 21-point lead. Then in the third quarter, this game looked like, like the first game against Dallas where the Spurs led by 33, where, the Spurs go up 81-55 by 26 points with 9 minutes left. Victor Wembanyama goes to take his, his substitution. So he goes to take a break. But then the team just goes ice cold. They fall apart. Brooklyn starts scoring on them. And so basically, the Nets won the third quarter 33-19. So like I said, San Antonio totally put up 19 points, was an ice cold quarter for them. Then when we look back from the 9-minute mark of the third all the way to the 8:40 mark of the fourth, the Spurs got outscored by the Nets 42-11, and Brooklyn not only came back to take the lead, but they led by as many as 5 points there in the fourth quarter. Rookie Dylan Harper comes in, brings a lot of energy, gets the team going again, and the Spurs reclaim the lead. Then from there, the game does get to crunch time, but then, in crunch time, the Spurs out execute Brooklyn and make more plays, where they basically outscore the Nets 15-7 in crunch time, and they end up winning by 11 points. So the Spurs, did, basically cover, the fact that they won by 11. But again, it looked testy there for a minute there, where Brooklyn was winning there in the fourth quarter by 5 points. So you didn't know, what was going to happen at the end of that game. So especially since the Spurs let a 26-point lead slip away on a night where they're going to have a game the following night on Monday, hosting the Toronto Raptors. So, like I mentioned, Dylan Harper was one of those key players for the Spurs. He had his best game of his early rookie season. He ends up with 20 points off the bench on 8 of 11 shooting, very efficient, 4 of 4 from the free throw line, 6 rebounds, 8 assists, 2 steals, zero turnovers. So again, 8 assists to 0 turnovers in 29 minutes. On offense, the Nets just could not stop his driving ability in the open court, either before their defense set up or with his ability to get downhill. One of the things I first noticed was that, when the Spurs' starters were in there, the Nets' guards and wings were putting a lot of pressure on those players, bringing the ball up the floor. Well, for a player like Harper, who has that downhill ability to really just, turn on a burst of speed, that kind of worked in his favor, where as soon as Ben Seraph or Agor Damon came in to kind of put pressure on him, he immediately got right by either of those players and got downhill, either got a layup or kicked out to one of his teammates for a good-looking basket. So again, for Harper, that pressure, didn't really hobble him too much. It actually let him get going a little bit better. So he ends up, being a force there in the paint, on his drives. He ends up with 16 paint points in the game to lead the Spurs in paint scoring. He also, before this game even tipped off, he was already leading the team with 23 drives overall. So basically, he's showing that he's very comfortable getting into the paint, at the NBA level, despite being a rookie and either creating for himself or creating for his teammates. On defense, he was applying a lot of on-ball pressure to both Ben Seraph and Agor Demon, and specifically Demon. I mean, there was just so many possessions where Harper was really hounding Demon as he brought the ball at the floor, and I was just wondering, is he eventually going to get the steal? I know it's coming soon, and sure enough, I think it was in the second half in the third quarter, he ends up getting a steal on Demon and then ends up taking it in for a layup. It might have been the third or fourth quarter, I can't remember, but eventually you could just see it was coming. Like he was putting so much pressure on Demon. He looked so uncomfortable bringing that ball up the floor against Harper, and so Coach Mitch Johnson did note Harper's ability. He said, aside from the offensive stuff that he did and all the stats that he brought, he says that he feel like the better part of his game today was on the defensive end. Also, when Victor Wembanyama and Keldon Johnson were asked about, what flipped the switch in that fourth quarter, what really, led the team to reclaim the lead, and Wemby literally said Dylan. That's all he said was his answer. And then Keldon, reiterated, Dylan Harper really brought the spark there in that fourth quarter. So again, a very good game by the rookie. And as I'm going to talk about a little bit later, this also goes back to something he did in that Pelicans game. He wasn't having as good of a game in that New Orleans game, but in the fourth quarter when the Spurs were down by 8, Dylan came in and really, helped them get, got a three-pointer going, got a fast break layup to go in, and then he also got to the free throw line, and then all of a sudden the Spurs are up by like 5 really quickly with his minutes. So even though, yes, sometimes he may not be having the best of games, his downhill attack shows that he's not scared of these NBA defenses, and he's able to get inside. And something he also commented in his post game was that it was really interesting to me was when he kind of said, like, when the Spurs started to lose that lead when they were, leading by 26, and then, Brooklyn starts to come back, he says that he could kind of just almost like read the players' faces on the bench, and, he just wanted to bring that aggressiveness, kind of set that tone when he went back in the fourth. And so obviously, he demonstrated that, and it helped the Spurs, get this win. All right, let's discuss Victor Wembanyama. He finishes with another 30-point game, so 31 points on the night, 14 rebounds, 4 assists, 3 steals, a season first, 2 turnovers. So that's notable. I mean, again, 2 turnovers isn't bad, but Wemby had gone turnover-less in the first 2 games of the season, which was very remarkable for him. So again, he only had 2 turnovers there for the first turnovers of the season. Also 6 blocks in 36 minutes against the Nets. So the Nets is it's been interesting how different teams have been guarding Wemby. So obviously we saw in that first game against Dallas, they just wanted their bigs to play more one-on-one defense against him, Anthony Davis and Derek Lively. And as I'm going to talk about later, he basically, it was a monster against those 2 players in that game. Then against the Pelicans, we saw more so of, them sending a lot more double and triple teams his way, using a zone defense in the fourth quarter that I'm going to talk about as well to kind of limit his space a little bit on his drives, even though he still put up some really good numbers. And then now against the Nets, what they did a little bit differently was their initial attack was to try to basically, hound the players bringing the ball up the floor, like Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, Harrison Barnes, Julian Champagnie, some of the other starters on the Spurs that get the ball to Victor. And so that was more so one of their game plans, was to kind of put pressure on the ball handlers first, to make it harder for them to give Victor a pass where he really wants it. And then from there, of course, they would send double and triple teams at times, did Brooklyn. So again, the Nets' early ball pressure is what they used against Wemby, so he couldn't quite get into the paint as often as he had been doing against New Orleans and Dallas. So he did finish with a season-low 10 paint points. However, with his physicality, Brooklyn ended up fouling him a lot, and so he ends up making 10 of 15 free throws, so he made a new season-high 10 free throws in this game. He ended up shooting 9 of 21 from the floor. Again, not his best shooting night so far this early season. He did take a season-high 3 of 6 three-pointers. In that game, he made a really momentum kind of shooting 3 there in that second quarter when the Spurs went up by like 21, where he got like 2 blocks in a single possession on defense. Then he takes the ball down court from like 27, 28 feet and launches a triple pull-up, and he makes it to kind of just rides that momentum. So like I mentioned, the Nets were also sending quick doubles his way throughout most of the night. Overall, overall, again, despite him, maybe not having, as good of a shooting game compared to those first 2 games against New Orleans and Dallas. I mean, this guy was still just 2 steals and 1 assist shy of a 5x5. So Wemby again continues to put up some monster numbers, and as I'm going to talk about toward the end of the episode, I think he will be eligible or be a candidate this week for the the Western Conference Player of the Week. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. All right, Keldon Johnson had a very good game off the bench. Ends up with 19 points off the bench on 5 of 9 shooting. Went 2 of 4 from deep, both corner looks, and also was physical like Victor on the glass. Inside, ends up making 7 of 7 free throws, along with 3 offensive boards. Especially that Luke Kornet was out of this game. So again, a very good game for Keldon Johnson. Devin Vassell ends up with 16 points in this game on 6 of 12 shooting from the floor. He once again led the team in outside shooting with 4 of 6 from beyond the arc. He also had a late game steal and dunk in crunch time to kind of seal the game for the Spurs. Julian Champagnie shot a lot better at home now that the Spurs were back, because as we saw in those first 2 games on the road, he kind of struggled from his 3, despite him, shooting lights out during preseason. He ends up with 13 points on the night, on the afternoon, should I say. He finally shot better from 3, like I mentioned. Ends up going 3 of 5 from outside. Stephon Castle was the player who usually found him there in his corner spot for his 3-pointers, and he ended up helping on the glass too with 6 rebounds. And then Stephon Castle kind of, didn't have the he kind of had an okay game here with 13 points and 5 of 10 shooting, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, but 5 turnovers in 30 minutes. And that's kind of something that I've been noting is the turnover numbers, as I'll talk about a little bit later. So he did a better job of attacking the Nets' defense before they could get set in the half court, because, teams are starting to, now that we're getting into the season here, the teams are starting to do that same thing where they back off him, whoever's defending him, to kind of to provide another interior defender, especially a player who can kind of hound Wemby whenever he puts the ball on the floor. So I did a big, big film breakdown of how the New Orleans Pelicans guarded Castle over on the spotupshot.com if you want to check that out. But again, in the half court, teams are going to test him. He's really going to have to start relying on his jumper at times when they're going under on screens and kind of just backing off him 5 to 6 feet on purpose. So that's kind of one of the areas they'll have to kind of improve on as the season progresses. And like I mentioned, turnovers have also been a note worth watching with him, where he had 5 turnovers versus Dallas on opening night, then 9 versus New Orleans, and then 5 again against Brooklyn. Now, one thing to note though is that once De'Aaron Fox does get healthy and return to the lineup, Castle won't be handling the ball as much as he's having to handle it right now. And I know that coming into this game, I think his usage rate was like at 33% or something like that. So I think it's going to shrink a little bit more once Fox comes back, because Fox will have the ball in his hands in a lot of these situations, especially in those crunch time situations. All right, I also want to say that, yes, I know the Spurs won by 11, but I do want to say that I think that Luke Kornet's absence was felt. You can just see it there, on the screen, but also in the numbers. So on offense and defense, the Spurs did struggle whenever Wemby sat at times. They did collect fewer offensive rebounds and score fewer second chance points than they did in New Orleans. Also, the Nets shot an opponent's season high 61% in the paint. Wemby and Kornet had really been holding these teams down, like almost below 50% in both games in the paint. And then also the Nets scored an opponent's season high 17 second chance points, but again, Kornet shouldn't be out for too long, according to Coach Mitch Johnson, as I'll discuss as well a little bit later in this episode. And then for the Nets, the player they really relied on was Cam Thomas, who ends up scoring 41 points on 11 of 25 shooting. He went 5 of 12 from 3 and 13 of 13 from the foul line. For Thomas, one thing that I saw that he really liked doing was whenever the Spurs, their bigs like to play drop defense like Wemby or Bismack Biyombo. And so anytime they did that, that was a green light for him to come off the screen and shoot a pull-up 3. That was also something I noted that Jordan Poole did to the Spurs in that game against New Orleans on Friday. So that's just kind of something to watch with their scheme of trying to take away the paint completely, is that sometimes on those pick and rolls, those pull-up shooters can really, get a green light there. And then, the Spurs defended most, a lot of his shots pretty well. He's just a scorer. He's just a natural scorer, Cam Thomas, where he just makes a lot of contested jumpers where the Spurs are kind of in his vicinity, but he ends up knocking down and having a good night shooting the basketball. Moving on to some team notes from this game. So the Spurs won the 2-point battle by 18 points. And again, most of that came because of their dominance in the paint, where they outscored the Nets by 20 points in the paint. The Nets did win the 3-point line by 12 points in this game, which is kind of what kept them in this game and let them come back there in that second half. But it really came down to their shooting from outside. So overall in the game, they did shoot 32%. But as you could see in the first 2 quarters, they really struggled in the first half. In the first quarter, they shot 15% from 3. The second quarter, 23% from 3. But then in the third quarter and fourth quarter, they shot lights out, 46% from 3, and in the third quarter, and then 46% as well in the fourth quarter. And they got that confidence, because you even saw some guys on the Nets who weren't knocking down shots at all. A player like rookie like Agor Demon had missed all of his threes, and all of a sudden, in the fourth quarter, Wemby's actually closing out on him, and he just drills a 3 over Wemby. So it just came down to their shooting. It was kind of like a roller coaster for Brooklyn, and obviously it wasn't enough for them to hold on for the win, because the Spurs did make their comeback and end up winning. But it did dig them out of a 26-point hole. So you have to give them some credit there, Brooklyn. And then also the Spurs ended up winning the free throw line by 5 points. All right, now I just want to go through some of my observations from the first 2 games for the Spurs this past week against the Dallas Mavericks and New Orleans Pelicans to open the season. And if you want to, I'm just going to kind of give some brief overviews of these 2 games. If you want to read more of my detailed notes and also my film breakdowns, I did some over on the spotupshot.com on both games. So on Friday, the Spurs defeated the New Orleans Pelicans in overtime by 4 points. Wemby had 29 points, 11 rebounds, 9 blocks in 32 minutes, almost a triple-double with blocks there. He did foul out in overtime, but because the Spurs had Luke Kornet in that game, he was able to hold down the fort there in the paint for the Spurs, even without Victor there in that closing period of overtime, and the Spurs held on for the win. One thing I noted in my film breakdown was how the Nets were deliberately, backing off of Stephon Castle. They were giving him, like I said, 6 to 8 feet of space. Players they hid their bigs on him sometimes. Zion Williamson and Derek Queen both were matched up with Castle at times on purpose, and they would just basically back off Castle. Zion especially would just kind of stand at the free throw line, wouldn't even try to put his hand up on any of Castle's shots. So Castle was being tested by New Orleans, and he was having a rough shooting night. But then all of a sudden, it just shows what Coach Mitch Johnson said, his fearlessness, where all of a sudden it's like less than, I think, a minute left in the game. The Spurs are down by 2 points. Castle just pulls up with the Pelicans backing off of him, and he drills a pull-up 3 to give the Spurs a 1-point lead. And then, of course, the game went to overtime, and then later on the Spurs won in overtime. But again, it just shows his fearlessness despite how the defenses are purposely backing off of him from 3. I also noted how the Pelicans used what looked like a 2-1-2 zone defense where they had two players at the elbow, two players down near the paint, and then they kind of had a player in the central area where there was a guard up top, helping to try to prevent, get his hands near Wemby, or if it was a big kind of floating around the baseline as well. So that's kind of what the zone looked like in the fourth quarter. So the Spurs offense did stall a little bit in the fourth. Especially that the Pelicans were really limiting Victor's drives because they would just hound him with 2 to 3 defenders whenever he tried to put the ball on the floor. But then eventually the Spurs got a player to kind of get into the free throw line area. That player would catch the ball and kind of move the ball around, and then they'd find some 3-point shots, and they drilled some of those shots, to eventually kind of beat that zone there. Vassell had a good night here with 23 points in New Orleans. He made 6 threes for the team. Luke Kornet off the bench had a very sound game with 14 points, 12 rebounds, and 4 assists, and 1 block off the bench. I did a film review of him and just how he kind of just makes those little plays happen, setting screens, rolling, cutting, all in like one possession. He'll do some of these actions, crashing the offensive board. Harper had a tough game, compared to Sunday against the Nets, but he really changed the momentum as well in the fourth, as I talked about earlier, where the Spurs were down by like 8 points, and then all of a sudden Harper goes on his own 5-0 run. Then he, helps Harrison Barnes get some baskets, and so he just has this momentum changing element to his game early on, is what we're seeing through 3 games so far this season. And now let's see here. Yeah, let's move on to Wednesday. So the Spurs did open the season with a shocking 33-point win over the Dallas Mavericks, because Dallas was expected to win this game. They were favored by, I think, 2.5 in this game. But the Spurs not only beat the Mavericks, but the fact that they just, they basically blew them out. The game was over basically by almost like early in the third quarter. So the Spurs again, blew out the Mavericks by 33 points. Wemby had a monster opening night with 40 points, 15 rebounds, 3 blocks. He scored 20 paint points with 9 made free throws. Like I mentioned, the Mavericks' approach was to go one-on-one defense against him with Anthony Davis and Derek Lively taking turns, and they had no answer for him. You saw Victor just bringing the ball up the floor, throwing a shoulder to Davis and just dunking or finishing, floaters off the glass. Same thing for Lively. I mean, the Mavs really had no chance of stopping him, as they demonstrated that, one-on-one defense against Wemby doesn't look like it's going to work this season for teams. And then we saw the different ways that the Pelicans and the Nets guarded Wemby. Also, Stephon Castle had a good game here with 22 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals. He was very aggressive in getting into the paint and scoring. He ends up with 12 paint points. And then Dylan Harper, in his rookie debut, ends up with 15 points. He also, figured out how to, just drive inside, get inside the paint, where he ends up with 12 paint points. So again, the Spurs, blew out Dallas in that opening night game by 33 points to move on to 3-0. Let's keep going. All right, next up, let's go through the injury report for the Spurs. So a new name has been added to that injury report, and that was Luke Kornet. On Saturday, the team announced that he suffered a left ankle sprain, I guess, in that game against on Friday against the Pelicans. So he was out on Sunday against the Brooklyn Nets. But Coach Mitch Johnson, when I listened to his pregame interview, it did sound like it's just a minor injury. It's not going to be something that's going to keep Luke Kornet out too long. Especially considering that the Spurs are on the second night of a back-to-back. So again, Kornet shouldn't be out too long for the Spurs. Then De'Aaron Fox, Jeremy Sochan, and Kelly Olynyk are all slowly ramping up, day by day to eventually making their return to the court. There's been some videos going around of them participating in 5-on-5 workouts whenever shoot-arounds happen before games. So again, they're getting very close. But when Coach Johnson was asked about their status, when he's been asked about their status, basically he's not putting a timetable still on their return. He just says that they're being very cautious. They'd rather be later than earlier, but he does think that they're treading in the right direction, those players, and that soon they will be back on the court. So again, I think we just really have to watch the injury reports that the team releases day by day. And so the Spurs' injury report for Monday against the Toronto Raptors, that has to come out no later than 1 p.m. Local time in San Antonio. So again, maybe we'll see if maybe one of those players gets listed as available or questionable or probable. So again, they are getting closer, those players, Sochan, Fox, and Olynyk. But again, we don't know exactly when that date will be that they finally play. Just speaking of when Fox returns, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch how the minutes are distributed whenever he comes back. So basically, through 3 games right now, here's how the minutes are getting distributed right now. The starting lineup has Castle with 31 minutes per game, Devin Vassell 35 minutes per game, Julian Champagnie 31 minutes per game, Harrison Barnes 30 minutes per game, and then of course Wemby 33 minutes per game. Off the bench, the players who are always going to get minutes are going to be Dylan Harper, 26 minutes per game, Keldon Johnson, 24 minutes per game, and then Luke Kornet, 25 minutes per game. And because the Spurs are missing so many players right now, from a depth perspective, they are giving some spot minutes to both veteran Jordan McLaughlin and rookie Carter Bryant, where McLaughlin's playing at least 7 minutes per game on average, and rookie Carter Bryant's playing 6 minutes per game. Okay, I gotta make sure I correct that. 6 minutes per game. All right, so again, the reason why I want to focus in on Fox is because, he's going to be one of the starters. He's going to be a player who's going to get a lot of minutes. I would say about 33 to 35 once he eventually, gets 100% healthy and is back on the floor in his normal routine. So because of that, I think that some of these players who are playing pretty well right now, they're going to have some of their minutes trimmed and some of their roles as well. So, off the back, I just can see that once Fox comes back, I do think that McLaughlin and Bryant won't play as much anymore at all. Once Fox is back. I think that Julian Champagnie will end up going to the bench, and then from there he's going to see his minutes slashed maybe from like right now where he's at 31 minutes per game to maybe something like 20 to 24 minutes per game. I think Harrison Barnes, who's playing 30 minutes per game, might see his minutes slashed a little bit to maybe like 25-ish minutes per game. And then I think that some of Stephon Castle, who's playing 31 minutes, and Devin Vassell, who's playing 35, I think their minutes will get slashed just a little bit to basically work it out to where Fox ends up getting his 30 to 35 minutes. Harper's getting 26 minutes per game right now, and I think that's kind of okay. I think they want to keep him right there in that realm of like 24 to 26 minutes. And then Keldon 24 minutes and Luke 25. Again, those seem okay. So again, I think those are the players who are going to have some of their minutes cut. It's probably going to be McLaughlin and Bryan completely get cut out of the rotation, and then someone like Champagnie, Barnes, Vassell, and Castle will see a little bit of a decrease in their minutes as well. Probably Champagnie sees the most decrease in his minutes once Fox eventually does return. But again, we'll see how that happens whenever Fox does return to the team. All right, before I close this episode, let's go through the upcoming week. So where do the Spurs stand as of Sunday, as I'm recording this at 5 p.m. Mountain Time? So the team is undefeated. 3-0. There's only one other Western Conference team who remains undefeated, and that is the Oklahoma City Thunder, the defending champions. So the Spurs are tied with the Thunder for first. However, when you look at the standings, the Spurs are actually first because they have a big margin of victory, winning games by 16 points per game right now because of that blowout in Dallas really helped them out there. So again, technically the Spurs are first, in the standings out west. So also they are leading the Southwest Division, a very competitive division. So they're 3-0 right now as of Sunday at 4:45 p.m. when I collected this data, Mountain Time. The Grizzlies are second at 2-1. The Dallas Mavericks, the Houston Rockets, and the New Orleans Pelicans were all 0-2 as of Sunday afternoon. They had not won a game yet. So again, the Spurs are right there, leading the West and leading their own division. Just some early records for the Spurs. They are 2-0 in crunch time now. So again, they're getting into these crunch time situations, and with Castle, with Harper, with Wemby, they're executing Devin Vassell, and they're able to hold on to these leads and win these games in extra periods, or not in extra periods, in crunch time. They're also 2-0 when leading by 25 points. So we've seen them get these massive leads already on both the Mavericks and the Nets. Obviously, the Nets one didn't look so good because the Nets ended up coming back and making it a close ball game. And then they're also 2-0 versus the West and 1-0 against the Eastern Conference. Now, for this upcoming week, one of the questions I have is will Wemby win the Western Conference Player of the Week? So this award does come out on Monday from the NBA. And so I think it's going to come down to either Wemby or Shai Gilgeous-Alexander of the Thunder, SGA. So let's just go through Victor's numbers this past week. 33 points on average, 13 rebounds, 2 assists, 0.7 turnovers, 1.7 steals, and 6 blocks. And the Spurs went undefeated 3-0. And they blew out, basically, yes, they blew out Dallas. And then also they want, even though the Nets came back, they ended up winning comfortably by 11 there in that crunch time period. So again, more, I would say, like statement wins for San Antonio. Now the Thunder, SGA goes off for 40 this past week, 40 points per game, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, 2.3 turnovers, 1.7 steals, and 1.3 blocks. Again, the Thunder are also 3-0. I would just say that they probably played. Yeah, they played, I have to look back at who they played. I know they played the Rockets the first game. I would have to look back at their schedule. I don't want to say they played better teams than the Spurs because the Houston Rockets are actually 0-2 right now. But I think that they played the Pacers. Yeah, I remember the Thunder, and they beat the Pacers well, and that was a close game. So I think maybe Wemby has a good chance of getting this because, like I said, it feels like the Spurs won more comfortably in their game. So again, we'll find out on Monday who ends up winning this award. Again, for the Western Conference Player of the Week, this comes out on Monday afternoon. Again, I think it comes down to Wemby and Shai. We'll see if it's either one of those two players or somebody else out west. So for the Spurs' schedule this coming week, and then when I'll record my next episode. So on Monday, they do have a back-to-back on the second night at home in San Antonio. So they're going to host the Toronto Raptors, who have been playing better basketball so far to start the season. I do want to note, though, that the Raptors are also going to be on the second night of a back-to-back because they are playing later today in Dallas, first, and then they'll play in San Antonio on Monday. Then the Spurs get 2 days off, to recover, and then on Thursday they're going to play the Miami Heat. On Thursday, and then they have 2 more days off, and then they're going to travel to Phoenix, and they're going to play the Phoenix Suns on Sunday. So basically, my next episode, I'm planning on recording either Monday, November 3rd, or Tuesday, November 4th. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.